Formula 1 has been seen as the pinnacle of motorsport for quite some time now, but some innovations have gone too far, creating a positive for some and a negative for others. One of these innovations is DRS. Some teams have been able to get absolutely every bit of performance out of it, while some just don't seem to get it. This year's Spa was a fantastic example of how extremely good DRS works. The folding wing was permitted on Friday but not on Saturday. Despite the tiny wing, Red Bull drove away from everyone once more. This has resulted in the FIA and F1 rethinking their opinion on the opening rear wing. Is it really necessary, or could we do without, at least for qualifying? Could we see a DRS ban in the near future? Red Bull outperforms the competition in every way. Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren and Aston Martin can sometimes only keep up on one lap, because the additional grip of new tyres masks the weaknesses of certain cars. However, Red Bull generally has a heavyweight rival in the race, at least for some races. But with DRS turned on, no car gets as much speed. This was particularly apparent in Spa. At 313.4 km an hour, Lewis Hamilton sped through the Eau Rouge passage. With 307.9 and 307.2 km an hour, Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen were far behind. So naturally, you'd seem to think that Lewis Hamilton will come out on top after Sector 1, right? Well, that's where the Red Bull DRS magic came into effect. The Red Bull drivers sped through the measurement spot at 340.8 and 338.8 km an hour towards the end of the following Kemmel Straight. Hamilton only got there at 330 km an hour. It's incredible how much lap time Red Bull gains as soon as the rear wing is open, said Mercedes engineer Mike Elliott. When we superimpose the speed curves, we can hardly believe it ourselves. So could we speak of an unfair advantage for Red Bull, or an unbelievable feat of innovation? You tell us. One thing is certain, that Red Bull is fast with its wing open and without. The weather situation at Spa provided a good indication of how effectively or poorly the DRS worked for the top four cars. On Friday, race management opted to make the DRS available in Q3. It was too hazardous on Saturday in SQ3 of the shootout, because there was still too much water on the course. DRS remained turned off. Red Bull, Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton all picked rear wings with the least amount of downforce. McLaren's only source of downforce was its rear wings. George Russell chose a wing with higher downforce than Hamilton. The difference in lap time between the Mercedes drivers on the 1,850 meters of full throttle between La Source and Lecumbe was 0.2 of a second. In general, the larger rear wing, the greater the DRS effect. According to this logic, the open flap on Friday should have helped McLaren and Russell the most. For Russell, this also proved true. He was ahead of Red Bull and Ferrari, although at a considerably slower overall pace, with a gain of 24.3 km an hour. McLaren, on the other hand, only managed to gain 15.3 km an hour, indicating to the engineers that this is still a work in progress. Despite the tiny wing, Red Bull gained 20.3 km an hour. With bigger wing variations, the distance grows even further. Meanwhile, Ferrari has a decent DRS effect with its high-speed wings, and is just slightly slower than Red Bull with a delta of 19 km an hour. Mercedes, on the other hand, has a lot of work ahead of her. With the wing open, Hamilton was just 13.2 km an hour quicker. Red Bull benefits greatly from the DRS impact whenever there are 3 DRS zones, or the DRS portions are excessively long. That is why Max Verstappen lost the pole position duel in Budapest. There is only one 500-meter DRS passage on the home straight, and 300 meters following the first corner at the Hungaroring. If Formula 1's intentions to enable DRS just in races, and not in qualifying, are successful, Red Bull will suffer the most. So the most recent qualifying, including the shootout sprint before the summer break, raised an issue, and a question that might result in significant regulation changes. Is qualifying better off without DRS? In Hungary, Max Verstappen's string of successive pole positions was broken by the influence of Lewis Hamilton's miraculous lap, which came 0.003 ahead of the Red Bull driver. The Dutchman then made a double pole start in Belgium, but in the sprint shootout without DRS, he was just a few thousandths ahead of Oscar Piastri and Carlos Sainz. This obviously makes for more excitement for the viewers, and possibly the drivers as well. And I mean, is it necessary to have DRS when you're not going to overtake? The cars are much closer on one lap without it, making it more interesting to watch qualifying as well. But the other argument could be that Formula 1 is the pinnacle of motorsport, so why not throw everything you have at it to set the fastest times possible, right? If it's just a case of brilliant engineering from Red Bull, why would you penalise them by banning DRS? Especially when the team itself thinks it's not that special and could be easily recreated. Red Bull's DRS, according to technical director Pierre Wash, has nothing magical about it and just reduces the RB19's already low drag even more. The movable wing had less of an influence at Budapest, since the straight of the Magyar track isn't as long, and the acceleration between turn 1 and 2 is much less. In Spa, however, the potential of deploying the movable wing on the Kemmel Straight in qualifying on Friday provided a further boost to Max Verstappen. Even though they're saying that their DRS is nothing special, the FIA likes to think otherwise. According to the German magazine Automotor and Sport, F1 is investigating at the regulatory level the potential of permitting DRS usage just in races and not in qualifying. If this scenario played out, Red Bull would undoubtedly be the most penalised team, albeit in the recent few races. The Milton Keynes engineers opted to sacrifice some of the DRS impact by packing the RB19 even more aerodynamically to further protect the racing tyres. The previous weekend in Spa was equally instructive in determining if Red Bull would be able to open the DRS or not. Verstappen was able to take advantage of the movable wing in Friday's qualifying in Q3 by inflicting an 8/10 deficit on Charles Leclerc. In the sprint shootout, however, the track was not yet dry enough for race direction to approve the deployment of the movable wing. Verstappen, Piastri and Sainz were surrounded in 25 thousandths in Q3 of the sprint shootout. Obviously, DRS alone wasn't worth 8/10 on the Kemmel Straight, but it's no secret that Red Bull takes flight over the competition in open wing, an advantage so obvious that the Anglo-Austrian team's technicians have even decided to accept losing some of its advantage to increase the aerodynamic load released by the rocket ship known as the RB19. In an interview, Red Bull technical director Pierre Wash stated his thoughts on the RB19's magic DRS. "There is no magic in our DRS. It doesn't even open more than the other teams. Its effectiveness can simply be traced back to the concept of our car. When our wing is closed, we don't have too much drag, and when the driver opens it, he gets a lot more speed. Our strength is purely aerodynamic." Even though Red Bull aren't focused on the DRS entirely, they did make some adjustments from last year's system as it broke multiple times during the season. The DRS had caused Red Bull numerous issues in 2022, particularly in Spain when the movable wing abandoned Max Verstappen at the most important moment in Q3, as well as facing massive flaws in the race. Last year, our problems were mechanical, in particular with the arm that controls the aperture. On the RB19, a bigger DRS would not make sense because it would increase aerodynamic resistance. Optimization must be done through the underbody, which must not resist open DRS. Thus, Pierre Wash emphasized that as with the DRS, suspension or underbody alone does not guarantee performance, but it does so within a broader discourse that includes the entire aerodynamic concept on which the single-seater has been set up, which has already had the pull rod rather than push rod scheme at the front since 2022. "This year, our goal was to increase the braking efficiency of the car," said Pierre Wash in an interview. "We've also increased the stiffness of our suspension. It is a key factor in how ground effect works. We therefore worked on the arm anchoring points and the stiffness of the springs, which must react when the car brakes. And all this must be done together with the concept of aerodynamics. This suspension must not interfere with the flow, but on the contrary, help it work better. A suspension is only effective because it is part of a concept. From all this, we can safely say that the DRS advantage is an extra of all the other engineering the team has done on the underbody and everything else that affects the aerodynamics of the RB19. So yes, they are fast with their DRS open, but others are also able to gain such a speed increase with their DRS open. So this leaves us with the following question. Is F1 better off removing DRS from qualifying and nerfing Red Bull? Or is it something that won't really affect the order we could see the cars line up in? After all, the RB19 looks like the pinnacle of motorsport F1 is so proud of. What would you like to see? Qualifying with or without DRS? And could you see it happening? Let us know in the comments down below.